What's up, everybody? It's the Digital World Podcast. And what we're going to discuss today is what to expect in the next, several years. And I think right now, here's the thing. I believe that a lot of people, and it's, in our nature, where we're very short sighted. And everything that happens in the next, couple days, weeks, is kind of how we plan our lives. However, there's higher time frames at play as far as what can happen in the next, months, which is like the shorter, um, longer time frames, but then it's years and then decades, right? And then you're talking about centuries. What can happen in 1 century? There's if you break a century into a tenth, right? It's decades. What can happen in 10 decades? A lot. What has happened in the last 6 decades, right? 1960s. So you see how things transpire over the course of time. And there's a lot of changes that occur. There's a lot of trends that emerge or reverse. Okay. And so my thing is, I'm trying to keep this is my long term horizon. What I'm looking at currently is something that's going to be decades long. Okay. So this hypothesis is that we've had a bull trend in the 30-year bond market or the bond market as a whole. And I do believe that in 2020 we had a shift in trend. We didn't know it then until now. I think that, and as the next 5 years develop, I think people will be able to see and call out 2020 as the beginning of a shift change. Now, when you look at the Federal Reserve and you look at some speeches that they've made, not just, we're talking about like, not just Jerome Powell, but other Fed chairs, or sorry, other uh, Fed personnel that make up the committee. And they discuss how they needed to solve the problem of low inflation. Okay? And how do you solve a problem of low inflation? How do you go about it, right? Now, whenever there's uncertainty, whenever there is um, the when people don't feel like they have the stability, right? You have, for example, you have tariffs, right? Tariff this, tariff that. Escalation of war here. Um, we're in countries threatening each other. It creates this instability amongst the citizens. And so right now, if you bombard them with, a narrative on the mainstream media, that's all they're hearing is like, hey, the supply chain might get affected, or the price of oil might go higher. Then what does that do to your cost of living, right? So you have all these. So you have the main media putting this out, right? They're projecting all these videos, these photos, this message. Then you have the subsequent channels, right? Like what you have on like YouTube, the smaller medias perpetuating that same message. So it becomes this this blast of information about a narrative of instability, of uncertainty. And I think that you're gonna see that even more as time goes on. You're gonna see that they will blast it even more, create that narrative. And I think we're going to be in a very volatile, like, I do believe that 2020 period was the time where we entered a very volatile time period. Um, the next 40 years, um, as far as this chart is concerned, right, are going to be one of volatility, upheaval, uncertainty. And I think uh, 2020 was just the beginning of that all. And because you got to understand, right? Like the debt burden that exists right now versus what existed in 1981 is drastically different. Okay. Um, you talk about having interest rates keep going higher. Excuse me. Keep going higher with the debt burden that the United States has and nations around the world. You got to be, um, living in a different world if you think that's not going to cause upheaval, right? And I think that a chart that I find interesting, which kind of puts into perspective kind of the demographics, right? Because so what I'm expecting, right, when I look at this is, hey, I do believe interest rates will keep going higher, which in turn, can bring down the face value of the house. But there's other demographic um, forces at play that are also going to contribute to that. One of the things being we have a declining birth rate that's occurring, and it's not so much of what people are saying, oh, they don't want to have kids. It's, well, what are the circumstances that led to that happening? And this is a very powerful chart here. So we have US birth rate versus 2 adult working households over time. Obviously, this data only goes back to the 1970s. I'm curious what it was before. Don't know that they had that data back then, potentially, but I would be very curious to see. But anyways, so we had percentage of 2 adult working households. So in the 1970s, right? So there's still more than 50 years worth of data. So we had it at 30%, right, in the 1970s. And over time, the percentage of 2 adult working households increased, right? And what you see is that it's drastically falling. The U.S. birth rate is drastically falling over time as you see this percentage of 2 adult working households. And it's essentially, right, replaced each other. Now, instead of 30% of 2 adult working household and a birth rate of 18 per 1,000, now it's the opposite, right? Now we have this is probably almost 70% of 2 adult working households. And now we have the birth rate at about, almost 11 per 1,000. So, yeah, it's definitely decreased, right, over time. And I think there's a lot of demographics at play with this. And so my thing is here is you're going to have an aging population that's going to be dying off. Who's going to be buying all those households if there's not enough people? So there's a oversupply of housing that would be hitting the markets, but not at those prices will they be bought. They're going to have to get substantially cheaper. So you have a aging demographic who has a lot of homes that as they start to pass away, there's going to be an excess of homes plus the new construction that's being built. So we have demographics hitting the housing market pretty hard. And so I think that heading into the future, you're going to see cheaper houses. I do believe that. How long and how it plays out will be, remains to be seen. But I do think that there's going to be a shift. And people who bought in, 21, 22 were buying at the peak of the market. And I don't think we're going to be seeing those prices anytime soon. And so that's why you have to be very careful and stay vigilant. So that being said, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. Share this information because I think a lot of people need to be aware of what's coming. All right, have a good one. Thank you guys.